Good morning, students. In today's class, we are going to discuss the initial chapters of the novel Mansfield Park. Students, Jane Austen starts with delineating what happened about 30 years ago when Miss Maria Ward married Sir Thomas Burton. Miss Maria became Lady Burton and the duo started living at Mansfield Park. Miss Ward, who has now become Lady Burton, she had two sisters. One of them married Reverend Mr. Norris, who didn't have much money but was not that poor. Her another sister, Miss Frances Ward, married a poor sailor named Mr. Price, who became poorer and he was a drunkard, and the family became poorer as the years went by. The Ward sisters grew apart accordingly. Frances had defied her family when she married the sailor, and Mrs. Norris and Lady Burton didn't speak to her for years. 11 years have passed, and Mrs. Price now has a big family, and she doesn't have much money to deal with all the kids. So she writes to Mr. Burton to ask for some help. She wants to send her eldest son to live with the Burtons to work for Sir Thomas. The Burtons don't want the kid, but they send a letter, some money, and a piece of advice. Mrs. Norris decides that Mrs. Price could really do with one fewer kid and proposed that Sir Thomas let the eldest Price daughter, aged 9, to come and live at Mansfield Park. Sir Thomas hesitates, but as he has heard some stories of cousins marrying each other, and doesn't want some random poor cousin marrying one of his sons. Mrs. Norris laughs this off and says that little Price will grow up like another siblings to the Burton boys, which means they certainly won't be getting married. Sir Thomas is finally convinced and says that they can send for the girl. Sir Thomas was somehow under the impression that Mrs. Norris was going to help out with the little Price girl, but Mrs. Norris had no intention of doing that since kids are expensive and Mrs. Norris was not that well off. Sir Thomas is surprised to hear that Mrs. Norris wanted nothing to do with actually raising the kid and says that the girl can just come and live at Mansfield Park full time. The Burtons and Mrs. Norris discuss their niece's disposition and hope she won't be too much trouble for them. Sir Thomas notes that girl will have to be brought up as not quite equal to her cousins since she isn't really a Burton, but that the family must not be mean to her or arrogant to her. So Mrs. Norris writes to Mrs. Price to tell her the plan. Mrs. Price is surprised that the Burtons want a girl and not a boy, but she shrugs it off and prepares to ship her daughter off to Mansfield. Presumably no one has bothered to ask the girl if she agrees with the plan or not. Students, Fanny Price is 10 years old. She meets Mrs. Norris in Northampton and proceeds with her to Mansfield Park. Fanny is very small and very shy. Her aunt and uncle greet Fanny kindly and her cousins are friendly enough. The entire family is good looking and Fanny looks a bit dumpy by comparison. We find that Tom and Edmund Bertram are 17 and 16 years old respectively, and that Maria and Julia are 13 and 12 years old. So Fanny is the baby of the group. Students, Fanny is upset and scared to be away from her home, and after spending most of the evening crying, the Bertrams send her off to bed to cry some more. The adults are a bit dismayed, but they decide that she is a bit homesick and will get over it soon. Mrs. Norris can't figure out why Fanny was so upset since she lectured her niece about not being Debbie Downer before they arrived at Mansfield. Fanny doesn't get over her homesickness quickly, though, and no one at Mansfield Park seems to understand what she is feeling. Students feel Fanny is not well educated as her cousins, which is awkward for her. Everyone at Mansfield Park scares her, and the house itself is a huge and frightening one for Fanny. Finally, Edmund notices Fanny and finds that Fanny is depressed and sits down to chat with her. He eventually gets her to open up a bit, and she explains that she misses her family, especially her brother William. She tells him that she wants to write a letter to William, so Edmund sets her up with some pen and paper and tells her that she will mail it for her. Edmund then gives Fanny some tips for dealing with the female cousins, and Fanny starts to grow more comfortable at Mansfield. Julia and Maria gossip to Mrs. Norris about Fanny and laughs about how dumb she is. Mrs. Norris tells the girls to be nice since not everyone can be as awesome as they are, and it is not Fanny's fault that she is a loser. Fanny grows up and is not particularly talented or brilliant, but does all right with her lessons. She is a bit out of place within the family, though no one is really outright mean to her usually. The Bertrams give up their townhouse in London since Lady Bertram is a kind of lazy, so the Bertrams kids spend all their time in the country. Sir Thomas is overall pleased with how his kids are growing up. Fanny is totally separated from her family and sees no one but William for years. William joins the Navy and Edmund goes off to school at Oxford. Edmund is Fanny's champion, gives her books to read, and is her friend. Fanny loves no one better than Edmund except for William. Mrs. Norris dies. Mr. Norris dies and Mrs. Norris moves to a small house nearby, but spends most of her time hanging out at Mansfield and talking to her sister. Since Mr. Norris died, his parsonage has been vacant. Students, Edmund was supposed to get the living that Mr. Norris had vacated by dying, but he doesn't. His older brother Tom has raked up a ton of debt, and Sir Thomas has to lease out the living to someone and therefore take some money away from Edmund in order to pay Tom's bill. Fortunately, Edmund has another living he can get. Sir Thomas is loaded and has lots of property. So he is sad that his son is that wasteful. A Dr. Grant moves to neighborhood with his wife to become the new clergyman. Meanwhile, Sir Thomas thinks that Mrs. Norris will now set up and take charge of Fanny since her husband has died and she really has nothing else going on. Students, Sir Thomas is hard up for cash after Tom thing. He also has a plantation in the West Indies that is losing money. So students, this much for today. We will continue with the discussion in our later classes. Thank you very much.